Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. I am Simply G, and today I'm going to be showing you all of the things that I got for the first half of January. There's really only a handful of things here, so it will be a super short video, hopefully. And as you may be able to tell from my voice, I'm not 100% well. I actually have a pretty aggressive cough right now. Last week I was very sick for the entirety of the week, and it's only been the last couple of days that I've felt even well enough to get out of bed. So please, I know I don't sound wonderful right now, but I didn't want to push this video back. I did think about it because there is only 3 things to show off, but I know that people do like the bi-monthly pickups videos, so there is a little bit to get to and a couple things I do want to talk about. So I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll get straight into it. So first off, we have something that's not really technically manga, not in the same sense that I think a lot of people would classify manga, but I have the Baltics Comics magazine number 32, Shu, or Sh, put out by Kush, which is a Latvian, I guess, publishing house. They put out a little small book like this every so often, and this book's theme was Japan. So as you can see, there's a whole list of different Japanese comics artists, all independent artists, some well-known, some not well-known at all. There is also one Swiss comic artist in here who is basically a mainstay of this publishing house and these magazines, so always is included in these anthologies. And with this book I did get a bookmark and a postcard and a sticker. So you got a couple bits and pieces. The book itself was relatively standard price for this type of thing. This is definitely an indie comics type of thing, so I don't necessarily know how many manga fans would be keeping an eye out for something like this, but I had seen it on Twitter. Quanticat got their copy. I'd seen a couple other people talking about it, and there is one I guess artist in here who their work I am particularly interested in, so I wanted to pick it up. And as I said, because it's an anthology and it's an indie comics anthology, it's very different, very probably not what you would expect from, you know, just buying a typical manga volume or a standard manga. But as you can see, it's a mix of like full colored and black and white and all sorts of different art styles and all sorts of different stories being told. There's some really good shorts in here, really interesting stuff. As I said, this isn't going to be for everyone. It's not really a manga fan thing that I think people would be following, but more so if you're into sort of underground indie alternative comics. This, as I said, this publication is from Latvia, so a lot of the times these books are from European or Baltic comics artists, and there's a lot of really interesting books that they put out, both like thicker books like this one, as well as like just smaller single story or single artist zines. It's really interesting, and some of these, as I said, some of these artists are well known, some are not. At the very back we have a list of everyone who's included, and as well as like whether or not their works have been released in English before, or in Europe as well, in France or Italy or Germany. So yeah, it's not a huge thing. It's not something that I would expect a lot of people to be even very interested in, but I had wanted to get it after I became aware of it. It shipped to me pretty quickly. I think they have a store in V. It's an online store, so you can get it pretty easily. And I'll put a link to it in the description below if you are interested, or look at some of their other books, see what else they've put out. And yeah, as I said, there's not a huge amount there aside from what I put off, but I think it's really nice to have more indie and alternative and underground works available in English especially, but just in general. I think the underground or independent comics market and community is really, really wonderful. I don't really show it off all too often in these sorts of videos because I know people are mostly interested in manga with my channel as well as anime, but I do on the occasion. I don't often buy comics that aren't Japanese on a regular basis, but I do get them. Like, it's not uncommon for me to get them. So, yeah, I like having a really broad range of styles and voices and stories in the media that I read. And comics is such a, like, creative and expressive medium that it's, you know, there's so much you can get from even like this very small independently published stuff, you know, community run or fan made zines, all sorts of things like that. Of course, in Japan they have like the doujin market and the doujin community, and that isn't just like works based off of fan, like, stuff that already exists. It does also include just generally self-published works. And I think in certain English communities there's still a stigma around self-publishing and sort of independent, especially if you're not super familiar with like the history of comics, and especially comics in the West and in the US especially. But Europe and all over. So it's nice to have this type of thing being really readily available for everyone. This book, as I said, is almost entirely Japanese artists. And so if you are wanting to see maybe a little bit more of what Japan has to offer outside of like serialized in magazines and obviously having to be stuck within strict editing and genre and expectations, it's really nice to have these sorts of little peeks into this almost counterculture to what is the popular. So yeah, I just wanted to show that little book off, and it's probably of no interest to anyone, but I really like it, and it's a solid little book. I think that this publisher, this comics magazine, really has some great stuff that they're putting out and some really consistent quality. So if you are interested in it, as I said, I'll leave the link to them below because they're worth a look if you've piqued your curiosity. Next, we have the only manga that I'm going to show off, and that is Descending Stories Volume 10 by Haruko Kumota, or Shou Genroku Rakugo Shinju. If you have not followed my channel for a extended period of time, this is the final volume of one of my favorite manga, especially, I guess, ongoing manga of the last year. It is phenomenal, fantastic, one that is very, very different from other current josei works that are available. It's a character drama about a very, very, I guess, esoteric and not very widely understood art of Rakugo, which is the art of storytelling. And so with this volume, it is the end, it's the final volume, and I'm just so thankful for Kodansha putting this out. When I actually first discovered that the series had been licensed, before it was even announced as licensed, I almost couldn't believe it, because this is not a series that will ever have a wide following, which is incredibly unfortunate because it is by far one of the best character dramas I've ever read, full stop, sort of regardless of medium. We follow our main character throughout his entire life, from childhood up until his old age, and his relationship with Rakugo, with this art form that over the Showa period really felt like it was dying. It was feeling like it was an art form that was one that the new generation wouldn't be interested in, because of course, if you're not familiar, Showa is a period of Japanese history, but it basically means it basically ran from the mid-20s up until the mid to late 80s. So obviously that period of the 20th century was huge, not just in sort of global events, but in how much society and technology and entertainment evolved, that the idea of like going out to see a performance of someone telling a story was very, very old-fashioned and very, very much seen as this dying art. And I mean, of course, that period of time from the mid-20s, all people had was like radio entertainment, and over the course of several decades, television became, a popular and standard form of entertainment. Just the way that we entertained ourselves was just so different, that this very practiced and traditional form of art and of entertainment was really dying with this generation of performers. And so our main character, he sees himself as emblematic of the Showa period and of Rakugo itself. And it's mentioned multiple times in this series that he feels like he wants to commit double suicide with Descending Stories. That what that means is with his death comes the death of the art form itself. That after he ceases to exist, Rakugo itself will cease to exist, because no one will care about it anymore, and no one will care enough to continue its life into the modern age. And he feels it's a very fitting end for both him and the art form, as this sort of forgotten part of this previous era, that it's fascinating to read, and it's written so incredibly well, and it covers so many topics, not just about sort of the artist dilemma of wanting to be the best you can, but trying to stay relevant within a culture that's always continuously changing and their attention being pushed to something else. And for our main character, his life, his perspective of his life is a very lonely one. He really sees himself as an island amongst the stream. He sees himself as a solitary individual in which no one else really has the need to become involved with his life. And if you read the manga, you know that that's incredibly false, and that's an incredibly sad and twisted way to see yourself. But that is definitely, I think, for this character who has spent his whole life, following something that he feels now is under threat of just losing relevancy and losing the people that he cares about and the other people who care about him is just so incredibly powerful and just so well done. And it calls into question, or it calls to attention, this idea of preserving these traditional art forms, these traditional things that may, to a lot of people, serve no purpose in modern era society, but are incredibly crucial to our history. With the death of Rakugo, realistically, you would lose hundreds of years of Japanese history. Without the storytellers of the past, and the story, or people to tell those stories of people long gone, you lose your perspective of those people, those understanding of those people. You see it all the time when it comes to indigenous populations and their storytelling, or even their language, because there isn't really people to preserve those things. We have lost so much of the world's history and how we understand, society throughout the ages. And in that sense, we have a very stubborn and very lonely main character, but thankfully the story itself is very hopeful. We still have Rakugo today. It's still something that exists, so obviously there wasn't ever an end to it, but it also pushes this idea of these traditional art forms, these traditional things, adapting to the modern age. Even though, we have all of these new modern conveniences and modern forms of entertainment, that doesn't mean that we should lose certain things. And in the last couple decades especially, we've really seen a resurgence of things that I think people really didn't respect or care about because they just wanted to push into the modern age. There are so many new things, new wonderful things happening that it's certainly now people are re-embracing them. And that's what Descending Stories is. Whilst the title, both English and Japanese, paint this idea of this fall from grace, this inevitability of this final swan song to an era, the actuality is that, the new generation modernism isn't completely removed from those things. We can adapt and evolve them to fit people's current interests, and that there will always be people who are still interested and passionate about these sorts of things. And whether that's because of, a movie or a television show or a manga, I know for a fact Karata, once Chai Furu started, that really gained its popularity. It was the same with Go after Hikaru no Go. It sparked an interest into younger people. And I don't necessarily, obviously this isn't a manga targeted towards a hugely young demographic, but I do think it allows it to stay within people's minds and for people to gain an interest, because there's so much out there that culturally is so fascinating and so interesting. And it's a shame when we do lose things, whether it be language or stories or particular traditional arts. It's important to have this preservation of the past, but not get completely stuck in the past with it. And by, you know, creating current interest and introducing younger people to it, it breathes new life to something that would otherwise just fall into obscurity and fall into sort of inevitably being forgotten. So yeah, phenomenal series. This final volume I've spoken way too much about anyway, but I knew this series would make me cry. It did. I knew what was going to happen, and I still bawled like a little baby. This is, if you're wanting a josei and you've already read the current stuff on offer, this is very, very different. It's very different, but it's no less powerful. Kodansha's done a phenomenal job with it. The anime is fantastic, and I would 100% recommend it to pretty much anyone. It's by far the best drama we've had in years. So yeah, check it out. It is complete with this 10th volume. It's not a huge commitment, and it's just so wonderful. And for this last thing, I needed to readjust my camera because it's very, very big. I got the newest art book from new publisher Dempo Books, and that is Futurelog by Range Murata. This is obviously the English edition, and it comes with 2 separate slipcovers, one plasticky, one illustrated, and then one obviously just underneath. There's a lot of fold-out spreads in this series, or in this book, I guess. It collects a lot of artwork from various things that Murata has contributed to. Not very much in regards to his work on like actual anime or manga franchises that you may be familiar with. This is more stuff that he put in the Robot Anthology and other like various things like that. I need to be a little bit careful with going through this because if you're unfamiliar with Murata's work, his typical style is, as you can see, very youthful, very childlike, and usually very female, like feminine. And some of these pictures are not incredibly safe for work, so I'm going to, as I said, be fairly, yeah, like that's pushing it a little bit. There's a lot of young looking girls in leotards in his type of artwork, a lot of young looking girls in swimsuits, that sort of thing. So if that's not you, if you're not interested in that, I would say maybe skip over this art book. But Murata is a very, very well-known artist. I'm sure most people are aware of his work in some form. And as I said, he's worked on a lot of very well-known anime properties. Coming straight to my mind are things like Last Exile, Blue Submarine No. 6, Shangri-La, Technolize. Was that what that show was called? I have to be really careful because I don't... Too many boobs at the end, which is not always a good thing. So, especially when I'm trying to find something suitable for YouTube. But yeah, just be aware, if you're wanting this book, that there are some pretty risque shots. It's fairly typical for Murata, so if you have any familiarity with his style, that should not be a surprise to you. But, yeah, if you're not familiar with his style, then maybe that is a surprise for you. As I said, I'm a little bit surprised that there was less, I guess, quote-unquote fan art in this book, in this particular book, in relation to Last Exile, Razafon, what am I saying, Razafon? Shangri-La, Technolize, and the various other things. Hibernate Runmei and Lane were also his works, I believe. He's a phenomenal artist, no question. But yeah, go into it knowing that there are some pretty risque shots of girls. Whether or not they're underage is, of course, up to the individual, but they certainly don't have an adult body, if that makes sense. Some risque things. We have some tasteful nudity as well. So yeah, just be aware of that. It's a huge book. It's very, very well done. Beautiful quality. I know prices are very, very high. I think the retail price for this is something like 60 USD. I think I got it for about 60 Australian, which is a little bit less than, which is probably like 45 USD. So I saved quite a bit of money on this one. It's now, I think, just general price everywhere. And I know that certain aspects of this book are limited to the first printing. I think it has to do with this cover, or this slip dust jacket. That's the word I'm looking for. So if you're wanting that, maybe get on this book sooner rather than later. It's not a must-have, especially if you're not like a huge fan of his, or if you don't collect art books in general. But if you do, this is a beautifully put together book. Dempa has done a fantastic job on it. It's a true cultivation of this artist's work, and if you are a fan of his, I would say definitely pick it up. Maybe not for retail price, but it's well worth the money. There's so many pages. There are so many fold-outs. I didn't even show you any of the fold-outs, but there's at least 3 for each section, double-sided. So there's so many beautiful pieces of artwork with this book. And if you are a fan of his, or an illustrator yourself, it's one that is definitely a great starting point for Dempa. I think if this is the level of their art books going into the future, whether or not they're 100% completely the same as this one or not, is just commendable. There's very few art books that can, especially English published art books, to this quality. I have a lot of art books within my personal collection, as I'm sure many of you know, but generally the English published versions of art books are relatively lacking comparing to their Japanese counterparts. Just off the top of my head, the original Fullmetal Alchemist manga art books that Viz put out, which were hardcover and very nice, I'm sure, but compared to, I think, just how the Japanese ones were put together are night and day. The hardcovers that I have from the Japanese publishers are always wonderful. The dust jackets, there's this level of quality to them that more and more we are seeing enter into the English publishing market, but it's not all that often that we do get an art book published into English. Recently we've had the Black Butler art book put out, one of the Pandora Hearts art books put out, all of the like Naruto and Bleach, and I know that Vagabond has had a couple art books put out in English, I think. And the recent Fullmetal collector 10th anniversary one that's been put out is beautiful as well. So it's nice that we are getting more art books. And in fact, at least in relation to the Tokyo Ghoul art book, the English one is nicer in that it's a much larger trim size. The Japanese one is the standard tankobon trim. So there's goods and bads on both sides, but Dempa's level of quality is out of this world, and I mean, I know people are already very excited about this publisher. I've already gotten one of their manga, which was Inside Mari. I showed off a couple months ago. And I have another couple of their manga on order. And it's still early days, of course, but I think there's a definite trend of Ed Chavez's passion and dedication for the books he puts out, and they just continue to be fantastic, just really, really high quality. And I really hope that Denpa, going forward this year and in the future, just gains more and more traction and allows us fans to more readily purchase their books, especially for international fans. I really want them to do very well, and I know that everyone is being really supportive of them right now. Kaiji is a must-have for a lot of people. I'm really excited about Maiden Railways, as well as I'm waiting for Invitation of a Crab. That's supposed to come to me tomorrow, so I'm really excited for that. And even some of their more recent licenses, like Heavenly Delusion, sound really interesting. There's just so much going on with this publisher, and I really hope to see them excel and succeed in 2019 and the foreseeable future. So that was everything that I got for this first half of January. As I said, really not a huge amount to show off, but I'm sure I spoke about all of it for way, way, way too long. But I hope it was somewhat interesting to you guys. There are a lot of really interesting and very different and unique things in here, all very different from each other, and I think different from what maybe a lot of other people are collecting right now. So, yeah, again, I apologize for my voice. I've been really, really sick. I hope it wasn't too distracting throughout this video. I did have to stop and cough a lot throughout this video, and it has affected the sorts of videos that I've wanted to make. The last week I wanted to put a video out, but obviously couldn't, being so sick. Hopefully this week I'm on the mend, so I'll be in ship shape for the next video. But we'll see when we get to that point, I guess. But let me know your thoughts on these few things that I spoke about. What you've gotten so far for January. I'm sure plenty of people have gotten a lot more than I have already in this year, given themselves a really strong start to 2019. But I love hearing your opinions, positive or negative. So leave me comments. I do try to get to all of them. As I said, I will leave a link to the Baltic Comic magazine in the description below if you're interested in that. I also have my link to my Twitter, which I'm on fairly regularly, so if you're wanting to get in contact with me or chat with me, you can do so there. And I also will put my book depository affiliate link down there, which, as I always say, you're under no obligation to use, but if you would want to use that website and just help me out whilst doing so, I really, really appreciate it. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next video, guys. Bye till then.